Welcome to the Pharmaphiles, where medicine meets mystery. Hi, I'm Lance Samard.
And hi, I'm Justine Burke.
So I want you to imagine sitting down with your morning coffee, right? You open up the Wall Street Journal and you read this actual historical headline. It says, "The radium water worked fine until his jaw fell off."
Yeah, it is frankly one of the most bluntly horrific headlines in the history of print journalism. I mean, the editors just completely abandoned any pretense of clinical subtlety there.
Right, because the reality of the situation was just too grotesque to sanitize. Usually, medical reporting from that era is incredibly dry.
Oh, absolutely. It's usually very stiff.
Yeah, but that specific headline introduces us to the really unbelievable topic of our exploration into the source material today. We are looking at Radithor, the radioactive energy drink of the 1920s.
And our mission today isn't just to gawk at the initial shock value of that headline. We really want to explore the psychology and, well, the medical landscape of the era.
Because we need to understand why highly educated, incredibly wealthy people willingly drank a lethal substance.
Exactly. We have to look at how the overwhelming allure of what people perceive as cutting-edge science can completely blind society to catastrophic danger.
And to do that, we have to view this through the lens of the main subject in our sources, this guy named Eben Byers.
Right. Buyers. Picture the ultimate 1920s industrialist golden boy. I mean, he was a Yale-educated amateur golf champion.
He inherited a massive Pittsburgh iron fortune, too.
Yeah.
So he moved through high society with this assumption that the absolute best of everything was just readily available to him.
Yeah, the best food, the best tailoring, the best medical care. He operated in a world where problems were just, things you paid the top experts to solve.
He was the archetype of the American elite. And this was a time when industrial wealth was creating a whole new class of people who were just obsessed with maintaining their peak performance and vitality.
Which makes the inciting incident of this story seem almost absurdly mundane.
It really does. So in 1927, Byers is on a chartered train. He's returning from the Harvard-Yale football game, and he falls out of his berth.
And he injures his arm. We're not talking about a life-threatening illness here.
Right. No terminal diagnosis. It's literally just a lingering sports injury.
Right.
But he's an elite athlete, right? He has access to the best doctors in the entire country.
Yeah, so a minor arm injury shouldn't logically lead him to an unregulated, highly experimental tonic.
Exactly. What was missing in standard medicine that drove him to this stuff?
Well, you have to consider the medical toolkit that a physician actually had in 1927. I mean, antibiotics hadn't even been discovered yet.
Wow, that's wild to think about.
Yeah, and corticosteroids for inflammation, those didn't exist either. Pain management was super rudimentary.
It mostly relied on heavy opiates, right?
Exactly. And those carried severe side effects, not to mention the huge risk of addiction. A competitive athlete like Byers would definitely want to avoid that.
So doctors were just desperate for non-narcotic therapies to offer their demanding, wealthy patients.
Right. So when Byers complained of lingering pain and, a drop in his athletic performance, his physiotherapist recommended this popular new therapeutic on the market.
And the scale of what happens next is what elevates this from a simple medical mistake to an absolute historical tragedy.
Yeah, he didn't just take a few recommended doses.
No, he started consuming 1 bottle of this tonic every single day. And then he bumped it up to 2 bottles a day.
The sources note his energy improved so dramatically that he made it a cornerstone of his lifestyle.
He even sent cases of it to his business associates. He sent it to women he was courting.
It's staggering. Over the next 3 years, Eben Byers consumed somewhere between 1,400 and 1,500 bottles of this liquid.
Which is just mind-blowing once we establish what was actually in it. Radithor wasn't some, blend of botanical extracts or a vitamin complex.
No, not at all.
Oh.
Each small glass bottle contained 2 micrograms of radium isotopes, just dissolved in triple distilled water.
It was marketed and proudly certified as being genuinely radioactive.
Which brings up a massive conceptual hurdle for anyone listening to this today.
Oh, for sure. We hear the word radiation, and our modern brains instantly picture hazmat suits, Chernobyl, lead vests at the dentist. We associate it exclusively with destruction.
But to understand Byers, we have to look at what radiation represented to a person living at the turn of the 20th century.
It represented the literal frontier of human knowledge, didn't it?
Absolutely. Let's look back to 1898, when Marie and Pierre Curie first isolated radium. The philosophical shift this caused in society just cannot be overstated.
Because the late 19th and early 20th centuries saw so much rapid change. You had germ theory, the commercialization of
The
electricity.
advent of X-rays,
Yeah.
motorized flight. I mean, society was experiencing this brief, intoxicating window where it felt like science was actively erasing the very concept of physical limits.
Yeah, radium felt like actual magic. It glowed with this ethereal blue light in the dark. It generated its own heat without burning any visible fuel.
And crucially for the medical community, doctors quickly realized that if you applied it to a tumor, it could miraculously burn away diseased tissue.
Which is the cornerstone of early radiation therapy, right?
Exactly. It could obliterate morbid tissues, and some of those early oncological treatments showed undeniable, visible results.
But then the cultural consensus took that clinical observation and made this massive, fatal extrapolation.
They did. The logic essentially became, well, if this glowing element possesses the sheer power to attack and destroy disease, surely we can harness a smaller amount of that same power to energize healthy cells.
Which is just such a profound misunderstanding of biology.
It really is. The ability to physically destroy cellular structure does not translate to the ability to nourish or energize a biological system.
But the public was so primed to believe that science had discovered the literal spark of life.
And that belief spawned a consumer marketplace that honestly reads like a dystopian science fiction novel today.
Oh my gosh, the sources detail an absolute explosion of radioactive consumer goods. You could buy radioactive face creams that promise to make your skin literally radiant.
There's radioactive toothpaste, radioactive chocolate bars.
I even read about suppositories. European wellness spas began aggressively advertising their naturally radioactive hot springs.
Yeah, as premium treatments for arthritis, lethargy, or really any vague malaise a doctor couldn't diagnose.
You could even purchase a specialized ceramic crock, fill it with regular tap water, leave it overnight, and drink the irradiated water the next morning.
The marketing language surrounding all these products was universally confident. It was so reassuring. It utilized the aesthetic of rigorous science to sell wellness.
It is so easy to look back and assume the public was simply naive.
Yeah, it is.
But the sheer pace of scientific breakthroughs at the time meant that skepticism just felt antiquated. Like, if invisible radio waves could suddenly transmit a voice across an ocean, why couldn't invisible rays from a glowing rock cure your joint pain?
That's a great point. And the regulatory environment was also virtually non-existent back then. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 had very little teeth when it came to medical devices and novel elements.
The government simply didn't have the framework to regulate radioactive isotopes in consumer goods.
No, they didn't. And into that regulatory void steps a man who recognized a highly lucrative opportunity.
Right, because most of the glowing products on the market at this time were actually harmless frauds. They used the word radium as a buzzword.
Similar to how brands use the word quantum today.
Exactly. But they contained no actual radioactive material. And then we get the creator of Radithor, William J. Bailey.
Bailey launched his company, the Bailey Radium Laboratories, in 1918. He claimed to have a medical background, but he possessed no medical degree whatsoever.
Big surprise there.
Right. He was a salesman, and a very persistent one at that. He actually carried several previous convictions for fraud and extortion.
And here is the darkest contradiction in our sources. The convicted fraudster was the only one telling the truth.
It's incredible. Unlike the scammers selling harmless tap water under the guise of radium, Bailey was scrupulously honest about his formulation.
Every single bottle of Radithor was guaranteed to contain genuine, laboratory-certified radium.
Because he was an incredibly shrewd marketer. He understood that to attract the high-end clientele he wanted, he needed to deliver a product that carried the undeniable prestige of authentic, expensive science.
So he priced it to be intentionally exclusionary. A case of Radithor cost roughly $30.
Which translates to several $100s today.
Yeah, so he was signaling directly to men like Eben Byers that this was a premium intervention, just for the elite. And his medical claims were sweeping.
Oh, he published pamphlets stating Radithor cured over 150 different conditions. Hypertension, depression, impotence, chronic fatigue.
It was positioned as this universal cellular optimizer.
Rationally, a modern observer would expect a highly toxic radioactive drink to quickly drive away customers, right?
Yeah.
The initial users would fall ill, the business would collapse.
Yeah, it should have become a brief cautionary tale. But Radithor sold exceptionally well for years.
It did.
And I am really struggling to understand the biology here. If radiation destroys tissue, Byers should have felt violently ill within the first few weeks of his regimen.
You would think so.
You don't just drink liquid radiation and suddenly feel like running a marathon. Why did he experience this massive surge in vitality?
Well, we have to look at a biological concept known as radiation hormesis. It is a hypothesis suggesting that very low doses of ionizing radiation can actually induce mild stimulating effects on biological systems.
Okay, how does that work?
When the body is subjected to a low-level toxic insult, it doesn't just immediately shut down, it triggers a systemic stress response.
So if I'm understanding the physics here, the low-level radiation is essentially clearing out the inflammation in his arm.
Not exactly.
Oh, it's not like a localized internal heat treatment that accelerates the healing.
That's a logical assumption, but that is exactly the trap. It wasn't healing the tissue at all, it was masking the damage.
Wait, masking it?
Yes. Radiation hormesis, at least as it functioned in this scenario, creates a systemic fight-or-flight response. The body detects the cellular stress and upregulates its defense mechanisms.
Oh, I see.
It releases endorphins, it pumps adrenaline, and crucially, it temporarily suppresses pain pathways in the nervous system.
That is terrifying. It's like a biological alarm bell is ringing, but instead of the brain registering the alarm as pain, the body just floods the system with adrenaline.
Exactly, effectively numbing the injury while making the patient feel totally invigorated.
Wow.
The clinical significance and safety of hormesis remain highly debated today, but that underlying physiological reaction explains the testimonials Bailey published. His wealthy clients were not hallucinating their benefit.
The Radithor likely did induce a stress response that felt, for a time anyway, like a miraculous return to youth.
Right, but the feeling of health was a complete illusion. What was actually happening beneath the surface relies on a catastrophic quirk of chemistry.
And this is where we have to look at the periodic table, isn't it? Radium belongs to a group called the alkaline earth metals.
Yes, which means it shares a very similar atomic structure to calcium.
And the human body is highly efficient at processing calcium to build and maintain bone density. But it's not sophisticated enough to differentiate between elements in the same chemical family.
Precisely.
I'm trying to picture how that works anatomically. Because the metabolic pathways don't see a difference, I keep thinking of it like a contractor hired to build a house.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, you give the contractor a pile of radioactive bricks that look and feel completely identical to standard clay bricks, and the contractor happily builds the load-bearing walls out of them.
Right.
The house looks perfectly fine from the outside, the structure holds up initially, but the walls are quietly destroying the interior of the house with ambient radiation.
That is a very accurate way to capture the mechanics of the poisoning. When Byers drank 2 bottles of Radithor a day, his body eagerly absorbed the radium as if it were a massive influx of dietary calcium.
It just transported the isotope directly into his bone matrix and locked it there.
Yes. And unlike calcium, which provides structural integrity, radium undergoes continuous radioactive decay.
And we are specifically talking about alpha radiation here, right?
We are. Alpha particles cannot penetrate a piece of paper or human skin from the outside. But once they are inhaled or ingested, they are devastating.
Because they're inside the house now.
Exactly. Inside the body, alpha particles act like microscopic bowling balls. They are heavy, highly ionizing particles that just physically shatter the molecular bonds of the surrounding bone tissue and marrow year after year without pause.
And this precise biological trap was simultaneously devastating a completely different demographic. While Eben Byers was willingly purchasing his radioactive tonic, a group of working-class women were being industrially poisoned.
Yes, they were later known as the Radium Girls. They were employed by companies like the United States Radium Corporation to paint the dials of watches and military instruments.
Using radium-laced luminous paint.
Right. And the executives assured these young women the paint was entirely safe. In order to achieve the fine point needed for dial painting, the women were actually instructed to point the tips of their brushes between their lips.
Which is just horrifying.
They were ingesting trace amounts of radium daily, purely to earn a living. And just like Byers, their bodies deposited the element directly into their bones,
Leading to the exact same pattern of horrific structural decay. The juxtaposition is just striking. You have the American elite willingly paying hundreds of dollars for the perceived prestige of liquid radiation.
while working-class factory workers are being systematically poisoned through corporate negligence.
The Radium Girls, however, recognized the deception. They mounted a fierce legal battle against their employers.
They did. Women like Grace Fryer spent years fighting the corporation's doctors, who were actively lying about their diagnoses.
Their highly publicized court cases in the late 1920s proved the occupational link to radium poisoning, didn't they?
Yes, and their suffering directly catalyzed the creation of the FDA's expanded regulatory powers. It established the legal precedents that eventually formed the Occupational Safety and Health Administration.
But for Eben Byers, no legal intervention could reverse the chemistry occurring inside his skeleton. The illusion of vitality eventually shattered.
It did, and his physical collapse was absolute. By 1931, the robust athletic champion had deteriorated to just 92 pounds.
The anatomical reality detailed in the sources is truly difficult to process. The persistent alpha radiation had literally hollowed out his skeleton.
The medical reports describe literal holes forming in his skull.
And the bone destruction in his face, a condition known medically as radium jaw or osteonecrosis, was so severe that they had to surgically remove his upper and lower jaw.
Just to manage the decaying tissue. His body was desperately trying to heal a shattered bone, but the bone itself was the source of the radiation.
He died shortly after the surgery at the age of 51.
And his death, given his immense social standing, was an international scandal. It served as a violent wake-up call to the medical community and the public.
So in 1931, the Federal Trade Commission finally issues a cease and desist order, shutting down William Bailey's operation.
The entire consumer market for radioactive wellness basically evaporated.
Yeah, the death toll from the dial painters was mounting, the science of radiation biology was suddenly heavily scrutinized, and the devastating reality of internal alpha decay became undesirable public knowledge.
Yet the historical record provides a rather enraging epilogue regarding the architect of this specific tonic.
Oh yeah, William J. A. Bailey.
The man who exploited the public's blind faith in scientific jargon to sell poison largely escaped the immediate physical fate of his customers.
He literally walked away wealthy and lived until 1949.
He survived simply because he didn't consume his own product with the obsessive daily volume that a perfectionist athlete like Byers did.
However, the sources note that when researchers exhumed Bailey's body decades later for analysis, his remains were still highly radioactive.
The product had permanently altered his physical composition, even if it took longer to end his life.
You know, it is remarkably easy for you and me to sit here armed with a century of advanced medical knowledge and judge the people of the 1920s.
Very easy. We view the idea of drinking glowing water to cure a sore arm as a sign of profound ignorance.
But the deeper takeaway from the sources is uncomfortable, precisely because human nature really hasn't changed.
No, it hasn't. If we synthesize the core theme here, it's not simply a historical cautionary tale about gullibility. It's a study of how people react to the promises of unregulated health optimization.
William Bailey didn't just sell trace amounts of dangerous isotope. He sold his clients the prestige of the absolute newest treatment.
He sold them the feeling of holding the future of human optimization in a little glass bottle.
He basically sold them the 1920s equivalent of a biohack.
He really did. When you look at the marketing language Bailey used, curing lethargy, optimizing cellular energy, promoting peak vitality, it's virtually identical to the language used today to sell unregulated wellness trends.
The scientific mechanisms we obsess over have changed, obviously, but the fundamental appeal of a complex, jargon-heavy medical miracle remains this constant vulnerability in society.
Exactly.
So I want you to think about the high-end, exclusive wellness clinics operating today. Think about the intravenous NAD+ drips, the unregulated peptide injections, the quantum wellness beds, and the extreme dietary protocols that use incredibly dense scientific terminology to sell optimization.
It's everywhere.
It is. Ask yourself, what modern cutting-edge treatments are you integrating into your routine simply because the marketing sounds like the future? And what will the medical historians of the year 2126 have to say about the things we enthusiastically consume today?
Because, as Eben Byers learned in the most devastating way possible, the miracle cure always works fine right up until your jaw falls off.
Until next time.